You're watching CNBC On Demand.
In this episode of American Greed, the wingman. A small-town politician goes on a brazen crime spree that reaches all the way to the nation's capital.
To understand his case is to understand, 12 different tentacles of criminality that are...
Has just been elected to local office in Seminole County, Florida.
It's like, did you wake up and say, oh, hey, I'm going to be tax collector today?
A millennial born into money and privilege, he begins almost immediately to abuse his power.
With all due respect, you're full of crap.
Stealing from his office.
And the next thing you know, Joe's making money.
Paying for sex with a minor.
He was using the...
Scheming against rivals, colleagues, even the federal government.
He texted his buddy to say, how soon can I blow it all on pussy?
But it's only when his case appears to ensnare a famous congressman that it hits the national stage.
We're learning some explosive new details surrounding the Justice Department's investigation into Florida GOP Congressman Matt Gaetz.
Featuring exclusive stories.
Graduated high school, he would ask me to go out for a couple drinks.
New details of his alleged scheming.
And he said, I want to get some ransomware together to put on the network.
And never before seen footage of Greenberg's arrest. American Greed unmasks the Florida man at the center of a Washington scandal.
My name's Joel Greenberg.
From the dark swamps of Florida, one slick resident, Donald Trump. His name, Congressman Matt Gaetz.
We must protect our home with unbreakable made in America strength. Strength I see every day in President Donald Trump.
Gaetz is an apex predator of the Trump era, but in early 2021, he's hit with an allegation that threatens to eat him alive.
Currently underway into the Florida lawmaker began with an investigation into an associate of his who's pleading not guilty to trafficking, stalking, and identity fraud charges.
That associate is Gaetz's friend, a local public official who is a complete unknown outside the small corner of Florida, where he's built an empire of fraud and depravity.
Good afternoon, Joel Greenberg, Seminole County tax collector.
To those who cover the story, Greenberg is a politician and a criminal unlike any they've ever encountered.
There was a boldness and an in-your-face disregard for the law that went on here that I certainly had never seen at another elected office. Ways of breaking the law that you didn't think were possible.
Greenberg's rise to power starts in this affluent enclave of lakes, swamps, and suburbs northeast of Orlando. In Seminole County and across with a mini empire of dental clinics worth millions.
It's a household name in Central Florida because there are so many of them. I passed 2 on the way here today.
Straightening pearly whites makes Greenberg Dental a booming business. But young Joel walks a crooked path as the family's black sheep.
And that was not Joel.
By the time he's a teen, Greenberg shows up in an Orlando Sentinel article about a basketball program for wayward boys.
His mother told a newspaper reporter at the Sentinel that he's my shining star who still needs more polishing.
To help with that polish in college, though he never graduates. He also finds himself in legal trouble more than once.
The money, I think, was a problem because it seemed like every time Joel got in trouble, somebody from the family would step forward with some cash.
Eventually, Greenberg uses his share of buying airtime for a program he creatively calls The Joel Greenberg Show. Greenberg is then in his late 20s, and he turns for help to a future Instagram model named Nicole Hampton.
I had just graduated high school. I was about 17, 18 years old. He reached out to me on Facebook. And his radio show, being as young as I was just starting college, it it meant a lot.
Though it seems like the start of a dream career, Hampton says her older boss is hardly a wise mentor.
Some of the things that he would say, or some of the things that we would have guests on that were a little bit more Howard Stern-esque. Our
Boys Club atmosphere. Hampton says she gets to know two very different versions of Greenberg.
He was really professional on air. Off air, Joel was a completely different Joel. I mean, during commercial breaks, he would make me like sit in his lap and stuff like that. He would grab my butt or slap my butt, and Joel would ask me to go out. I was 18, 17 maybe. I don't remember, but definitely not 21.
Then, Hampton says, there's the unconventional arrangement Greenberg has for paying her.
He would always write me checks at his house. Now, I worked for him Monday through Friday, so I don't understand why he just couldn't bring my check to the office or to the recording studio.
Enough, and leaves her dream job.
I did not want to be in the same room as him, especially working under him and knowing that I had to listen and do everything that he said.
Greenberg's attorney declined to comment about Hampton's allegations. The radio show isn't Greenberg's only venture into the media world.
Just sort of aimless. So he pursues this other sort of different tangent of a career, becoming a tax collector.
I don't remember exactly where I saw it, but I do remember being utterly shocked. It's like, did he wake up and say, oh, hey, I'm going to be a tax collector today?
For someone seemingly a tax collector in 2016 is odd. It's typically a low-profile position involving the collection of taxes and the issuance of driver's licenses, hunting licenses, and concealed carry permits.
In the hierarchy of local government, I mean, the tax collector is kind of like the long snapper on the punt team. You know,
If the job choice seems strange, so does Greenberg's pivot from failed shock jock to Politico.
You know, the name was well known through the dental chain. Joel himself was not very well known.
But that will soon change, in a very big way. When he enters politics, Greenberg has close to $5 million to kickstart his campaign with a $100,000 loan. Ironically, Greenberg's candidacy is based on attacking the ethics of his opponent, the county's long-serving tax collector.
They had a fella in there who was pretty clearly profiting from his office in ways that did not tire a bit. And his biggest line during the campaign was, people are sick of this, and I'm not going to do it.
When the ballots are tallied, Greenberg ekes out a win with 52% of the vote. And to those watching, his victory dovetails with that of another wealthy political newcomer with a home in Florida who's running for office.
To drain the swamp.
It's pretty clear from how he fashioned himself as a candidate, what he ran on, who he made himself out to be, and how he behaved after he got into office, that he was a perfect encapsulation of what happens when Trumpism comes to your local government.
All hell breaks loose. As one observer says, it's like the Tiger King got elected tax collector.
He would pay extra to the young women if they would take the ecstasy.
Long before his scandal makes national news, Joel Greenberg is sworn in as Seminole County tax collector in January 2017.
So I'm asking you to expect very little and to allow me to surprise you.
Once in office, he meets a young man named Brent Tyler.
I just finished my bachelor's degree in cybersecurity. I was trying to get my foot through the grapevine, and he invited me to come talk to him.
Tyler takes the job and gets to see that Greenberg is far from a typical boss.
He was a strange guy sometimes. You know, he'd talk about girls, talk about staff, how hot they were, how he'd like to do stuff with them. I mean, he seemed like a smart guy. He had good ideas, but he also sometimes just...
Greenberg fires off one of these crazy ideas.
At some point in the first year, he decided that he's going to form his own security force in the tax collector's office.
You know, and they were open carrying Glocks every day. They had little badges that said Deputy Tax Collector on them. Like, they were walking around like they were...
Tax collector hardly puts him face to face with danger. But Greenberg carries his own weapon and badge, and he seems more than happy to play cop on occasion.
Hello. I wanted to speak to a deputy in reference to a suspicious incident that happened with my mom about an hour ago. She was basically followed in a vehicle, air quotes here, did a in the front of her neighborhood, and a car pulled in behind her and had a flashing white light.
According to a Seminole County Sheriff's report, Greenberg is wearing his tax collector badge, a backwards hat, and a pair of cargo shorts when he pulls over the 61-year-old woman and lambasts her for speeding like a bat out of hell in his neighborhood. And a month after the incident, real cops pull over the fake cop, who now seems to see speeding as no big deal.
I'm baffled that the professional courtesy doesn't at least issue a warning something like this. Any part of you that said maybe I should just give this guy a warning?
No. I'm a traffic officer. This is what I do.
And you felt this situation warranted giving me. Look, I get it. Apologize for speeding. I hope I didn't come across as being rude or a dick. No? Not at all? No, I did.
Among those who get a close-up look at Greenberg is Seminole County's elected Board of Commissioners.
We have the tax collector's office. Mr. Greenberg here.
To raise questions about the way he is spending taxpayer money. Then Commission Chairman John Horan is one of those who tussles with the tax collector.
In the $11 million that you've submitted a budget for, there are some new executive positions. We see a new executive chief operating officer at $93,500.
Though it's alarming, the commission has no constitutional job is left to a state agency, Florida's Department of Revenue.
We can't say no to him. We can say no to the Department of Revenue and object to certain aspects of his budget. But the Department of Revenue passes on his budget. That's a real problem if you have a tax collector who gets in there and wants to do things that aren't in the best interests of the taxpayers.
That's exactly what Greenberg...
The budget for the upcoming year?
As the commission attempts to push back, the young tax collector becomes more and more belligerent.
With all due respect, you are full of crap.
Hang on, just a second.
As the problems heat up, cybersecurity contractor Brent Tyler says he gets a message from Greenberg asking him to meet. Of all sizes have been facing a new cyber threat called ransomware.
Back now with that big American city held hostage by hackers demanding money. It's the latest instance of an attack known as ransomware, a growing danger that could strike where you live.
When Greenberg calls in Tyler, he seems to have heard the news and allegedly decided that a ransomware attack on a local government...
His office. We went in there. He was a little late, and he said, "Hold on, stay quiet," and he turned up the music. And he said, "Hey, I'm having issues with one of the county commissioners. I want to get some ransomware together to put on the network." So he wanted to create a virus that would spread through the county's network and encrypt all their files so they couldn't use it. And then they, $500,000 to $1 million was his target area he was looking for. He said he would split it down the middle with me, whatever we got. And I mean, that was a very shocking thing to hear. I mean, how would you even put that into words at that point in time when you're being offered something like that and that illegal?
Greenberg's attorney declined to comment on the ransomware allegation. He leaves the office and gets a new job. Then, according to records of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, in December 2017, he meets with department officials.
I told them the whole story in their car. They said they were going to need some time to digest it and see what they could do with it. And nothing really ever came of it.
A spokesman for the closed because it came down to Greenberg's word against Tyler's. And when that happens, the tax collector continues along his path of destruction.
I mean, if there was no consequences, he could just keep doing what he wanted to. I mean, he got away with it for 3 years or so.
Next, if Greenberg's public antics seem odd, they're nothing compared to exclusive footage of Greenberg's last moments as a free man. Greenberg is making quite a splash.
I can unequivocally say that we have the best run tax collector's office in the state of Florida, and the numbers back it up.
Despite, or perhaps because of his antics, Greenberg seems to be a star on the rise in Florida's Republican Party.
I think that Joel always wanted to move up in politics. And I think that this was designed to do great things with the tax collector's office.
Greenberg is filled with ambition, and he isn't afraid to talk about the many connections he builds.
I've been with the governor, Ron DeSantis. I know Congressman Matt Gaetz.
And Matt Gaetz is this young congressman who has also hitched his political fortunes to Donald Trump. He comes to Washington in 2017, is a buddy of Matt Gaetz. And Matt Gaetz is Donald Trump's most staunch defender on Capitol Hill. And Donald Trump really likes that. So Matt Gaetz is going to the White House, and Joel Greenberg is going with him.
Greenberg marries shortly before he's elected and will have 2 children while in office. To help build his credentials, his wife uses her Facebook page to post pictures of her husband at the White House.
I love that sign right there. Trump, baby, Trump, yep.
Representative Gaetz donates to Greenberg's re-election fund and says he thinks the tax collector with a growing record for oddball behavior would make a good addition to Florida's congressional delegation. The 2 young public servants pal around together often, sharing pictures like this one with longtime Republican dirty trickster. And one Monday morning in the spring of 2018, tax collector's office employees come into a branch where they find things in disarray. When they check the security camera footage from early the previous morning, they see that Greenberg and another man had entered the office, then gone through baskets of discarded driver's licenses.
They were rummaging. It was very odd for a 2 a.m. visit, per se.
Brent Tyler says his mother, who is a Greenberg employee, checks into the situation with her boss via text message.
She asked him if he was in the Lake Mary office, and he said that he was with Congressman Gaetz, and that they had been showing him the operation up there, and they had seen some items. They were always put where they should have been, in a disposal box. I mean, why would you be in a driver's license office in the wee early morning hours on a Sunday? There's no real reason to show somebody your operation when everything's closed.
Harlan Hill, a spokesman for Gaetz, says that the congressman never had anything to do with fake or discarded IDs. But Greenberg, and this is hardly all he's up to.
Joel was using an escort website that had become popular. Basically, older men would, they would call them sugar daddies, would pay sugar babies, to spend time with them. And so Joel would find young women through this website and then essentially hire them to attend parties or to extra to the young women if they would take the ecstasy.
One of the women Greenberg pays for sex is only 17 when they meet. It's here that Greenberg commits the first of 6 federal crimes he admits to in his plea agreement: sex trafficking a child. Though the girl claims online to be an adult, Greenberg will later admit he had reasonable opportunity to disregard of this fact. Hardly a master criminal, Greenberg shells out more than $70,000 over 2 years for sex with her and others, sometimes compensating women via the online payment app Venmo.
We'd meet a young woman on seeking arrangement and we'd pay her, say $200, and we'd say it was for ice cream, or say it was for salad, or for gas money. That's
Venmo records show Greenberg makes more than 150 payments to dozens of young women.
Greenberg was so out there and, for lack of a better term, open about this, that he was using the credit cards that he had from work to pay for some of these transactions.
In addition, Greenberg uses government and about many others. And he uses his access to the tax collector's office to steal identities for himself and others.
When people would turn in sort of an expired driver's license, so you go to get your new one, you give them your old one, they would just sort of throw it in a basket. Joel was going through those baskets and pulling out expired licenses and then using equipment to make
multiple IDs, but also the young women that he had what they called sugar daddy relationships with also had IDs that he had made for them. And what the purpose of those were, I couldn't tell you.
And this isn't the only way Greenberg is using his elected position for his own benefit.
yesterday installed.
A quintessential millennial, Greenberg is a cryptocurrency evangelist.
He was riding the Bitcoin train hard. Invest in Bitcoin. We're going to start taking Bitcoin for payments.
The guy's not stupid. I mean, he sees this wave and he thinks, hey, we ought to be on this. And I think he could have been right. But again, he gets his money.
Greenberg uses hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars to make cryptocurrency investments that benefit only one Seminole County resident, Joel Greenberg.
None of that cryptocurrency profit was ever returned to the tax collector's office.
At some point, however, Greenberg says he realizes he'll be in big Olin to buy cryptocurrency.
Joel became aware that investigators were looking into him diverting tax collector money for some of these Bitcoin schemes.
He needed $200,000 and he went to a family member who was not identified in the plea. And the family member gave him the $200,000.
What did Joel do? Joel spent it on more Bitcoin. Back to their same relative and said, I really need $200,000 this time. And this time the relative gave it to him again.
Coming up on American Greed. Even after Joel Greenberg's many misdeeds go public, the tax collector just can't stop breaking the law.
He is willing to go as far as to bribe someone on the inside working for the federal government.
Joel Greenberg's sex trafficking of a minor and others and his Bitcoin schemes may be obscured for now. But his odd behavior and wasteful spending after his election, Orlando Sentinel columnist Lauren Ritchie unveils $3.5 million Greenberg has spent handing out new jobs and contracts to more than a dozen allies.
He was giving out contracts to friends, to 3 groomsmen in his wedding party. He just ran around with.
An auditor hired by the county will later determine that many of the personnel Greenberg hires are unnecessary, and the contracts he gives out are vague, excessive, or unneeded.
You can't just go around, spending money so that your friends have contracts.
When Ritchie's column comes out, Greenberg is facing re-election, and more people begin to realize he may not be suited for public office.
The stuff he did and the stuff that appeared in column was so egregious and so impossible to refute. It's just all based on records that I think people started coming out, then became Joel's victim.
Brian Butte is a local school teacher in Seminole County. He files to run against Greenberg in October 2019 and later explains the decision this way.
I'm a teacher at a small school in a small community who simply saw a need to replace someone who was taking advantage of regular citizens like me.
Works receives anonymous letters, purportedly from a very concerned student. They falsely claim that Butte has been having sex with another male student, and local law enforcement officials come to investigate.
They initially opened the investigation into the teacher, right? This was a serious allegation, but very quickly, I mean, almost immediately, they realized, no, this is an investigation into who's to figure out is Joel essentially licked the envelope. They found his DNA on the letter. Once they discovered it was Joel Greenberg, they turned that over to the feds because the feds at this point had already been investigating Greenberg for months for financial improprieties at the tax collector's office involving his cryptocurrency investments, involving some of the other dealings there.
Though Greenberg is the one his opponent of a sex crime with a child that finally lands the tax collector in legal jeopardy.
Anytime, a local agency or a state agency had looked into him, they'd come away either concluding no crime had been committed or there was no way to prove one way or the other, and they just sort of washed their hands of it.
And so it finally came down to the feds to provide some accountability.
Wants to look at.
As they sort through it all, the feds move quickly to arrest Greenberg, charging him at first with the most obvious crime, stalking his challenger, Brian Butte. But there's much more to come. Next, even after his indictment, does his scheming.
Which tells you something about his judgment, doesn't it? He doesn't have any.
Want more greed? Follow us on Instagram, connect on Facebook, and listen to the American Greed Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be right back. Following his arrest on stalking charges, Joel Greenberg resigns from office and finds himself in need of a job.
He's just gotten thrown out of a job that pays him nice, hard, cold cash. And he needs money because to Joel, I mean, he wouldn't consider a lifestyle change.
It's clear in this video he posts online, he is all too familiar with the once-in-a-lifetime pandemic that unfolds alongside his scandal.
Hey everybody, Joel Greenberg here. I wanted to give you an update. Today, May 28th, I tested positive for COVID.
But where others see a life-changing crisis, Greenberg sees a chance to cash in.
He's trying to help people across America who are being devastated by the pandemic. The economy has been turned upside down. They are giving grants and loans and money to individuals to help them get by.
As these programs ramp up, Greenberg gets in on the action.
Well, he knew the feds were looking at him. He got involved with a buddy, Small Business Administration, out of COVID-19 relief loans. He had a couple of, like, essentially defunct businesses. And so Joel activated these businesses and filled out these applications claiming they'd been hurt by COVID and they needed the money.
He's flat-lied. I mean, he said that these companies had pretty extensive profits the previous year. They hadn't even existed the previous
representations. But the former tax collector has a way of getting around these safeguards.
He is willing to go as far as to bribe someone on the inside working for the federal government to help him do that.
According to his plea deal, Greenberg receives a total of $432,000 from the program, including one loan after he's arrested by the feds on the initial stalking charges.
Which tells you something about his judgment, doesn't it? He doesn't have any.
Even though he knows he's under the investigative microscope, Greenberg brags about the scheme on his phone.
One of the most sort of Joel-esque details of patients had been submitted. He texted his buddy to say, how soon can I blow it all on pussy?
There is a level of stupidity to the criminality that made this case very easy for the government, I think, once they got started.
Up next on American Greed. As the revelations mount, Greenberg takes an early morning trip that will cost... This is not up for discussion.
Okay.
As Joel Greenberg's case drags on, the federal government begins to pile on more and more charges. A litany of identity theft charges, wire fraud related to his use of office money to buy cryptocurrency, money laundering, stalking his challenger Brian Butte, and conspiracy related to the COVID relief scheme. Even people used to reporting on federal crime say it's a staggering series of charges.
Typically that they're looking at, you know. In this case, you go in and it's like a buffet of different criminality. It's different things at different stations, all seemingly similar in the fact that they have disregard for the law, but all very different in the areas that they're trying to dip their hands into.
Following his initial arrest, Greenberg remains out on bond and undeterred. He goes on an early morning mission to find his wife at her parents' home in Jupiter, Florida, 2.5 hours away from his own house in Seminole County.
What's your emergency?
Hi, so my daughter's husband is on house arrest. They live in Lake Mary, but he just showed up here in Jupiter looking for my daughter. He's on drugs. I have no idea if he has a weapon. So I just let myself in the bedroom. Freaking out.
Okay, is there a protection order?
No, but he's on house arrest in Lake Mary.
Do you know why?
Yeah, because he does bad things. His name's Joel Greenberg.
Before long, local cops arrive on scene where Greenberg is sipping on a cup of coffee.
These are my in-laws. Just making a test. and I came down to visit.
You have to go. This is not.
Can I get some creamer?
This is not up for discussion.
Okay.
The trip lands Greenberg in hot water. Under the terms of his bond, he's not supposed to leave the area where he lives.
But that meant nothing to Greenberg. Joel Greenberg has no regard for the doubt about it.
A few days after his visit to Jupiter, sheriff's deputies in Seminole County come to Greenberg's home to arrest him. In this American Greed exclusive, body camera footage shows that Greenberg isn't going down easy.
I have tannerite planted all throughout my yard. It's not just tincture, waters into the IEDs. It shows a lot of damage.
Much to the dismay of deputies waiting to arrest him, Greenberg remains inside for more than 2 hours. And law enforcement officials try to coax him out with flattery.
You don't know how impressed I was with what you did. Somebody coming out of left field ain't gonna help.
Eventually, Greenberg agrees to surrender. Following a bumpy ride to jail, it's clear that Greenberg's case is blown up in his face, and a judge orders him detained pending trial. Then, less than a month after his arrest, the sex trafficking allegations involving him and...
We're learning some explosive new details surrounding the Justice Department's investigation into Florida GOP Congressman Matt Gaetz. At the center of it all, allegations of a pay-for-sex arrangement between multiple women and Gaetz, as well as an indicted Florida politician, according to the New York Times.
We find out in the spring of 2021 that Matt Gaetz is facing relationship with a minor, and as we dig in and report on that, we find this case. We find that Joel Greenberg has told federal authorities about the fact that he saw Matt Gaetz having sex with these women, that Matt Gaetz gave him money for the sex that Matt Gaetz was having with the women, that Matt Gaetz knew why the women were brought along.
Or that he has had a sexual relationship with an underage girl.
I'm built for the battle, and I'm not going anywhere.
Referring to teacher Brian Butte, Gates' spokesman tells American Greed that Greenberg has pleaded guilty to lying about another man having sex with minors. That man was innocent, and so is Representative Gates. He also said that the allegations against him won indictment. But in April 2021, Greenberg's attorney makes it clear that he thinks the congressman is not out of the woods yet.
I'm sure Matt Gaetz is not feeling very comfortable today, right?
Then in May, Greenberg pleads guilty to wire fraud related to his cryptocurrency scheme, various fake ID charges, taking part in a COVID challenger, Brian Butte, and sex trafficking a minor between the ages of 14 and 17.
To understand his case is to understand like 12 different tentacles of criminality that are all different in and of themselves.
Having admitted to multiple crimes, prosecutors say Greenberg is facing at least 12 years in prison.
And he's for Joel. And I think he'd rat his grandma if he could get a lesser sentence.
You're watching CNBC On Demand.
In this episode of American Greed, it's a crime for our times.
It's largely a cautionary tale about the culture of Silicon Valley.
The rise and fall of Elizabeth Holmes and her billion-dollar blood testing startup, Theranos.
She was Steve Jobs, the next Bill Gates, but of healthcare.
I must say, you're an extraordinary woman. Is she a genius founder with a noble mission?
In my mind, I've always thought the true legacy of Silicon Valley is to build great products that can make a difference in the world.
Or a brazen fraud with a reckless disregard for human life.
I knew she was putting patients' lives in jeopardy. And she was saying things like, fake it till you make it. You do not do that with patients.
Holmes has officially been found guilty of 4 charges in a criminal fraud trial.
Elizabeth Holmes had promised to change the world. Now she is almost certainly going to prison.
American Greed has the inside story of the tall tales spun for starry-eyed investors.
People are going to make a killing on Theranos.
The lies, the spies, the threats.
It's terrifying.
The trial when Holmes herself takes the stand.
Holmes says she's the victim of a decade of sexual and emotional abuse at the hands of her former boyfriend and business partner, Sunny Balwani.
He, of course, denies all of this, calls the allegations deeply offensive and personally devastating.
Now, some people say that this was a case of money versus humanity, but there's really a lot more.
By the time Elizabeth Holmes stands trial in the late summer of 2021, she is a walking Rorschach test. Your quote, girl boss.
The Holmies, the Elizabeth girls fandom, is alive and thriving, and they're all over social media. Their reasoning is, well, male villains have become icons. Look at the Wolf of Wall Street and Jordan Belfort. So why can't Elizabeth Holmes become a female icon?
Others see investors and patients as the symbol of everything wrong with Silicon Valley. The hubris, greed, and duplicity. But when she takes the stand in her own defense, there's another persona. Victim. She points a finger in the direction of her former second-in-command and secret boyfriend, Ramesh Sunny Balwani. Holmes says Balwani was a menacing presence at Theranos. Will the jury buy her story?
We have not seen an Elizabeth Holmes like this that breaks down, that cries, that is emotional. But at the end of the day, these abuse allegations really have nothing to do with what she's being charged with.
I grew up in a family that was very focused on the belief try to make this world a better place.
Holmes grows up a child of privilege in Washington, D.C. Her mother is a congressional staffer, and her father is a former Enron executive. Though they're well off, the Holmes family seems obsessed with what they don't have, according to one-time neighbor and former family friend, Joseph Hughes.
These kids are raised with the idea that eat nice upper middle class way is not good enough, because it's not what the Fleischmans had.
Elizabeth's parents, he says, like to remind people that the Holmes bloodline is descended from the famed Fleischmann yeast family.
And we're not just supposed to be in a home most Americans would think is luxurious. We're supposed to be in an estate. We're better than this.
At 9 years old, little Elizabeth proclaims to her parents that
from them to at least start in this direction. And there's no doubt in my mind that for Elizabeth, the notion of becoming this family champion and restoring them to grandeur is part of who Elizabeth is.
And she's got no time to waste. Right after high school graduation, the overachiever jets off to Beijing to study Mandarin as part of a Stanford University summer programs. One person in the program sticks out. He's a 37-year-old man named Ramesh Sunny Balwani. He's a software engineer, a seasoned veteran of Silicon Valley startups, and is already worth $40 million. Yet he and the soon-to-be freshman click.
I was studying at a program in Beijing University in China, and he was there.
She was department knew about her Chinese, her skills, and so that's how when I first met her, I'm like, oh, you must be the Elizabeth Holmes.
Elizabeth Holmes arrives at Stanford University in 2002 with an ambition so big, it's almost childlike. She wants to become the Thomas Edison of biomedical engineering. Edison Phyllis Gardner.
She came to me twice. I always try to help students. I will do anything I can.
Dr. Gardner listens patiently to Holmes's idea, a wearable device that would simultaneously diagnose and treat disease.
She wanted to make a skin patch, and she wanted to sample the blood to test for an infectious disease. And then she wanted to deliver extremely their low potency. And a patch, you can't get things with the skin easily. And so, how are you going to do this?
Gardner believes Holmes's idea would require a quantum leap in science. But according to her, Holmes doesn't want to hear it.
I just couldn't help her. She didn't want help. She thought she knew the world of microfluidics, or two.
So let me tell you a little bit about the class.
Undeterred, Holmes pursues a more receptive mentor, Stanford engineering professor Channing Robertson. Years later, New Yorker journalist Ken Auletta will interview both Holmes and Robertson.
In describing Elizabeth Holmes, he said, how often in your life do you get
to meet a Beethoven. He left his tenure position to join her, became a member of her board, and was a devout believer in her.
I have to tell you that this is going to be a special year because this is the last time I'm teaching the class.
Elizabeth Holmes has charmed her first champion. It seems Holmes has all she needs from Stanford. At age 19, she drops out to start her fledgling company, which in 2003 she dubs. And after Channing Robertson, Holmes gets her first financial pat on the back in 2004. That's when Tim Draper, a well-known Silicon Valley venture capitalist, invests $500,000 in the fledgling company.
And she said, I'm going to transform healthcare as we know it.
Around this time, Holmes abandons the wearable idea and conjures a more audible recount years later when she's famous.
Having a needle in your arm is something that has kept people from taking care of themselves, right?
Absolutely, myself included. I'm absolutely terrified of it.
Holmes's lifelong fear of needles, she says, makes her fixate on a device that could perform hundreds of blood tests from a finger prick. Holmes calls her prototype the Edison, with a
Wonderful idea. We're going to make medicine cheaper for people. We're going to make it more convenient. It would be wonderfully disruptive, which is one of the things that Silicon Valley prides itself on.
And the investor class is all in. By 2006, she's raised more than $40 million in venture capital, including almost $6 million from media magnate Rupert Murdoch. Here's a long runway to perfect the Edison and someday bring it to market. But there's one big problem, according to journalist John Carreyrou. The idea is more science fiction than science.
When I started looking into Theranos, I learned early on by talking to laboratory scientists at universities. And the consensus among these scientists that I'd spoken to was that it isn't enough to do all those tests. And the quality of the sample that you get from a finger is just not as pure. It's polluted by tissue and cells that interfere.
The pie-in-the-sky idea becomes an albatross in the lab, and Theranos blows through its initial investments. By 2009, it's broke, with little to show for it. Unbeknownst to investors, Sunny Balwani has been advising Elizabeth Holmes and secretly dating her. It will become an 11-year romance, with shocking details revealed at Holmes's trial. Holmes says when her relationship with Sunny first blossomed, she was vulnerable, because she had been sexually assaulted at Stanford. She testifies that after confiding in Sunny, he told emotional shelter Balwani offers. He's a financial haven, too.
Long story short, I ended up giving a 12 or 13 or $14 million personal loan. I guaranteed a loan to the company.
The loan comes at a critical time, when Theranos is on life support. And just a few months after cutting this check, Balwani assumes the number 2 position at Theranos, Chief Operating Officer. Up next, Theranos goes live with patients.
Walgreens, they have decided that your way is the way to go.
But is Holmes recklessly dismissing warnings? For 8 years, Theranos has been toiling in obscurity and failure. But Elizabeth Holmes has a positive label for it: stealth mode. Just like her heroes, Holmes believes that success will be found right around the corner after one more experiment, one more iteration, one more try.
I think her great strength was selling. She has great charisma, great charm, and she's a great saleswoman.
And thanks to her parents' connections, Holmes has another advantage that many Silicon Valley founders lack: easy access to billionaires, including Oracle founder Larry Ellison.
She was able to get Larry Ellison to invest money. And I think once she had Ellison involved, I think it became a lot easier. Because from Ellison, she got...
With a former Secretary of State on her team, the evangelizer-in-chief recruits a board stacked with the who's who of Pentagon and Capitol Hill heavy hitters.
George Shultz really was the architect of the board. He then reached out to Henry Kissinger and James Mattis, the Marine General, and Bill Frist, the former Senate Majority Leader, Republican Majority Leader.
And none of them had any experience in medicine or science. So they were not equipped to stress test her claims. They believed what they were told.
The board raises no questions when Holmes hints that Theranos is about to sign a huge deal with the Pentagon.
The ability to take a technology like this and put it in flight, specifically on a medevac.
Such deal is in the works. Theranos even refuses to share its financial statements with investors, using the famous names on the board to deflect questions.
And now you have a person who can tell investors they can't see audited financials and they can't see things because she has Larry Ellison involved. And who are you to think you're brighter than he is?
Theranos has been in talks with Walgreens, the drugstore giant with annual sales of around $140 billion. Holmes imagines a future of consumer-driven medicine where patients can walk into a Walgreens and order their own blood tests.
For us, the individual has to be at the center of getting information about their own health because it's the only way in which people can then...
$40 million partnership is made public in September 2013, and Theranos kisses stealth mode goodbye.
Walgreens, they have decided that your way is the way to go.
It's the first time most people have heard of Theranos, and the company needs to move fast to get its device ready to go live and test real patients in Walgreens stores. New scientists.
Wow, I'm an entry-level, worker coming into this startup.
Erica Chung is 23 at the time, fresh out of UC Berkeley with a degree in molecular biology. Just 1 month after the big deal is announced, Chung finds herself in the Theranos conference room with Sunny Balwani.
He said, okay, you're going to interview with Elizabeth. And at that point, I think I was starstruck.
Elizabeth offers Chung a job, and she takes it. She'll be testing the accuracy of Theranos' proprietary device. A hush-hush vibe pervades the lab.
They kind of created that ambiance. Like we were part of a sort of governmental agency or the CIA or something sort of top secret, or that there was a lot to protect here.
But the more Chung learns about how protective,
I was primarily working with the Edison devices. And my job was to run a bunch of tests to make sure the device was working. There were so many issues with this device that almost every day it was telling me this machine is not producing accurate results.
Chung naturally shares these unsettling results with colleagues via email.
And then all of a sudden, he wasn't BCC'd, but all of a sudden they were responding to the emails that we were writing. Things that we had said in certain contexts would be reiterated to us, like things that we would say in private with one another. They are monitoring our emails. Like we can't even trust whether they're recording conversations that we are having. We are being treated as we could potentially...
Stakes are raised when Chung works with real live patients.
It's a nightmare. Every day you're just like, this is wrong. I feel sick. Like I can't do this.
In September of 2015, talk about Theranos' origin story.
But where did the original idea come from? Meaning, what was it that inspired you to even do this?
It came from losing my family members and people that I loved.
Early detection of disease. Holmes claims it will save lives. And in Arizona, Theranos lobbied and order any test they want without a doctor's order.
To build a healthcare system in which early detection and prevention become a reality. That is why we work to pass this law. It's why we believe Arizona's law can and should serve as a model for the nation for direct access testing.
There was this certain patina of credibility that this company had because they're in a...
Elizabeth, I want you to know I appreciate the partnership and investment Theranos has made in Arizona, and I look forward to working with you in the years to come.
So I think a lot of times people's immediate reaction was, well, this has got to be legitimate.
Merle Ellsworth, a retired dentist in Phoenix, walks into his local Walgreens for a prostate cancer screening test run by Theranos. His initial results looks like
that something was multiplying rather rapidly within me.
His doctor wants to verify the result, and Ellsworth ends up taking 3 Theranos tests. Results are all over the map. Some indicate cancer, some are normal. The 4th test uses the time-tested venous blood draw. This one is accurate, indicating he does not have cancer.
What people were being sold.
When patients give that small finger prick sample of blood, they think the test is going to be performed right there at the drugstore on the Edison device.
That wasn't actually what was going on in reality. They were just sort of collecting the vial blood at a Walgreens, sending it over to a main laboratory that we had in Palo Alto, and then having people like me basically run it on.
Device is so unreliable, prosecutors say Theranos secretly takes patient samples and tests them on machines made by other companies. But for those samples to work, these third-party machines must be modified and the samples diluted, which can give inaccurate results.
But there were many instances that we knew we made a mistake, and they would not let us tell patients that were going on internally.
Lab errors can have tragic consequences. At Holmes's trial, a woman with a history of miscarriages testifies that a Theranos blood test told her she was about to miscarry again. She says she considered preemptively terminating the pregnancy to spare herself any more pain, but she sought a second opinion. She shudders to her now 6 years old and healthy. For Erica Chung, her first job out of college is forcing her to deal with issues most people will never have to confront. Things like healthy people being told they have cancer or HIV.
It's incredibly stressful. And the fact that you see yourself working for this company that is lying to yourself of like, this is wrong. I feel sick. Like, I can't do this.
Erica repeatedly warns her superiors, including Sunny Balwani, that the device isn't working. But Holmes is busy with photo shoots. The summer of 2014 is her coming out party.
It's all about achieving that perfect calibration between masculinity and femininity.
In order to realize a world in which prevention's a reality.
You had a deep voice, and you had sort of the de-sex black turtleneck. But you also had, the red lipstick and the really vampy blonde bob and the piercing huge blue eyes that just penetrated you whenever you spoke with her.
To evaluate multi-site precision, or in our case, multi-device
belief. Let me tell you what is really happening here.
For years, people have wondered if her voice is genuine.
People are fascinated by the deep voice. Like, why did she have a deep voice?
Some point to an NPR interview from 2005 where the voice, and maybe the facade, seems to crack, just for a second.
No, it hasn't. Well, if I use traditional words to describe.
And at trial, Holmes hints that Sunny might be a modern-day Pygmalion, responsible for her transformation. She says Sunny told her to kill her old self and become a new Elizabeth, and to act like a man. In one text exchange shown to the jury, Sunny writes, "You are speaking with everyone in your giddy voice. Excessive use of awesome molded you." Up next, if Elizabeth Holmes is just a character, how long can she keep up the act?
A lot of it was like this constant strive for perfection, and that's dangerous.
In her public image, Holmes is seemingly monastic, wearing nothing but black turtlenecks, consuming little more than green juices, and not dating. In reality, the home she and Sunny Balwani share in Atherton is the type of house that gets its own highly produced narrated short film when it hits the central architecture. They fly private, and a team of security guards shuttle her and Sunny, codenamed Eagle 1 and Eagle 2, into black SUVs.
I've always believed that, everywhere there's a glass ceiling, there's an iron lady right underneath it.
The press is fawning, and Elizabeth apparently believes her own PR. She texts Balwani of the year. In 2014, Rupert Murdoch invests another $100 million. The Walton family of Walmart fame invests $150 million. And the DeVos family puts $100 million into Theranos. Forbes magazine estimates her personal net worth at $4.5 billion, and Theranos' valuation climbs to $9 billion.
It has people who are willing to jump in and bid up the valuation for your company.
Ken Auletta is a big-name journalist with The New Yorker and is given the VIP tour of Theranos.
And it was an amazingly elaborate. If you just looked at that, it was really impressive.
There's an article this week, you gotta read. It's in The New Yorker, and it is by Ken Auletta.
His article, published in late 2014, is largely
needle testing.
He says now that Holmes lied to him, but Auletta does sound some notes of caution.
I think there are questions about it, and I think the company is overly secretive. I mean, I took the test twice in a drugstore in Palo Alto. I insisted on seeing the machine it went into. So I said, what happens to the nanodata? How do you ascertain what my blood tests reveal? And she turned 6 times. It was gobbledygook. And that's when I described in the profile I wrote, her answers to the questions are sometimes comically opaque.
As Holmes explains to Auletta, a chemistry is performed so that a chemical reaction occurs and generates a signal from the chemical interaction with the sample, which is translated into a result.
The fact that anytime you would ask off and not want to discuss it or to find some sort of workaround, I mean, that's a big indicator sometimes of like, well, maybe the person doesn't know.
At a Fortune magazine forum, Holmes struggles to answer an easy question.
How can you run all of these tests with such a small amount of blood, and why hasn't anybody done this before?
Over the last 11 years, we've reinvented the traditional laboratory. Every test that is run in a traditional laboratory to be able to operate on these tiny volumes of blood or other fluids.
One point seems clear.
You can create a new reality when you do it that way. And so that's how we've approached it.
Well, you've definitely created a new reality.
A new reality.
Every time I would go closer and closer to the top level leadership, the more and more pushback I got in terms of like, well, this isn't a problem with the Edison devices. This is a problem with you. And maybe you need to reconsider what you're doing.
Text messages between Sonny and Elizabeth show they believe the fault lies with their employees, not their technology. Talking about her staff, Elizabeth writes, "This is what's disappointing how bad these people are."
Sonny had essentially said, you need to decide if you want to work here and basically test patient samples without question. And in my mind, I knew 100% that I could not. And so I left the company and I quit. And I think I was severely depressed after that. It's very challenging to come out of a situation like that and wonder, what happened.
And board members to acknowledge clear problems. Ken Auletta has a few possible explanations.
The first word that comes to mind when I think of Elizabeth Holmes is zealot.
I started to see business as a vehicle for making a change in the world.
These are people who really believed they were doing God's work. And by God's work, I mean they believe they were
getting a medical service because they can't afford it. And so we're going to do whatever it takes.
I think the other factor that helps explain the board's tendency to applaud her was greed. People were going to make a killing out there. And I think that was very alluring to them.
I must say, you're an extraordinary woman. Thank you for being here. Up next, employees discover it's not easy to put their Theranos experiences in the rearview mirror.
It's terrifying. You're driving in your car, you're like, is this person tailing me?
Want more greed? Follow us on Instagram, connect on Facebook, and listen to the American Greed Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be right back. The halo effect surrounding Elizabeth Holmes doesn't charm everyone, and some of those skeptics are about to have their day. In addition to being a former neighbor and family friend of Elizabeth Holmes, Joseph Fuse is also an attorney and biotech entrepreneur in his own devices.
My father's the creative one, there's no doubt. He is always brimming with new ideas.
In 2011, Elizabeth Holmes accuses Fuse Pharma of stealing one of Theranos' ideas. The Fuses vehemently deny the charge and defend themselves against Theranos' outside counsel, David Boyce, considered one of the most aggressive and is partially compensated in Theranos stock.
I think of myself as a decent lawyer, but not against David Boyce. So I handicapped our chances as not so good.
Over 3.5 years of costly, brutal litigation, Fuse allies himself with people who seem to know a lot about Elizabeth Holmes. People like Phyllis Gardner.
I was in the room with my father calls fraud through the phone.
The way I describe it is like a burr under my saddle. You founded this company 12 years ago, right? Yeah. Tell them how old you were.
I was 19.
She was everywhere. She'd pop up on CNN and everywhere, and you're like, oh, that's just crazy.
And Phyllis had a lot to say. And that made us feel a little balance in this alternative universe.
I knew she was putting patients' lives in jeopardy. And she was saying things like, fake it till you make it. You don't do that. You do not do that with patients.
This little cabal that also formed as a result of that case became a seed in her demise.
Fuse reaches out to John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal. Carrie Rue digs further, finding numerous Adam Rosendorf.
It turned out, after talking to him, I learned very quickly that the company was lying. They went and they modified third-party machines made by companies like Siemens and tried to adapt them to small fingerstick samples. And that created a host of problems. When you're diluting samples too much, you're creating problems with accuracy.
Carrie Rue also interviews Erica Chung.
And so it was a relief. Like, finally, the truth is going to get out there.
The relief doesn't last long. Elizabeth and Sonny soon catch wind that former employees are talking to the Wall Street Journal, and they launch a ferocious counterattack. Elizabeth texts Sonny, "This whole thing that we have to respond to liars is ridiculous," and he assumes them to be true. Sonny responds, in trying to find the source of the leak, Sonny texts, "I am narrowing this down to 5 people. We'll nail this mother." Their crusade to silence Carrie Rue's sources leads to action ripped from the script of a thriller. Since quitting Theranos, Chung is lying low, temporarily staying with friends while she starts another job. She believes confirmed as she walks to her car one night.
The guy jumps out of his tinted window SUV and is like, "Erica," and he's like gunning towards me, and he hands me this letter.
It's addressed to Erica at the apartment of the friend with whom she's been living.
And so I'm freaked out because at this point, they're not only sitting outside of my new employment, they're also following me because there's no one who knows this.
It accuses Erica of defamation and sharing trade secrets. The list of demands has 7 points and threatens a lawsuit. Erica, who has little money and resources at the time, says her stomach sinks when she sees the signature line.
Like, oh, great. What have I gotten myself into now?
On the stand, Holmes will be confronted by check investigators marked as payments for the E. Chung project.
It's terrifying. You're driving in your car, and if you have someone that follows you for more than 6 blocks, you're like, is this person tailing me?
And just this morning, the Wall Street Journal ran a pretty scathing article about the company.
On October 15, 2015, Jen McFirst in a series of Carrie Rue's excoriating exposés.
Ms. Holmes, welcome back to Mad Money.
Within hours, Holmes launches a righteous counteroffensive.
I personally was shocked to see that the Journal would publish something like this.
Holmes and her supporters accuse Carrie Rue of being a sexist bully, and she plays the victim.
This is what happens when you work to change things, and
off camera is a different story.
She threatened me in the Wall Street Journal with litigation. Her boyfriend, Sonny Balwani, threatened doctors who had spoken to me on the record and tried to get them to recant. Those are the actions of a bully.
Carrie Rue believes Holmes and Balwani got caught up in the culture of Silicon Valley, where buggy beta versions of software can be released to the public, and
the problem that in the fall of 2013, they went live with blood tests that weren't perfected. They figured they would iterate over time. But while you can do that in the software industry where lives aren't at stake, you can't really get away with doing that in the healthcare industry.
In the fall of 2015, federal lab regulators sanctioned Theranos for putting patients in immediate jeopardy. Holmes...
all you can do is learn from your mistakes.
In an interview with NBC's Maria Shriver, Holmes vows never to give up.
What I want to do is realize this mission, and at any point in time, I will do whatever it takes to serve this company in the best way I can.
Do you think this company will survive?
Absolutely.
No doubt?
No doubt.
2 years later, Theranos struck more bad news for Holmes.
Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes has been indicted on federal wire fraud charges.
The feds charge her and Balwani with multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud against investors and patients. Up next on American Greed.
After they read the verdict and they took the jury out, Elizabeth Holmes got up. She went over, embraced her.
Anything to say, Philip?
The big question hovering over the trial of Elizabeth Holmes, will she?
You know, it was a surprise to pretty much everyone in the courtroom, certainly probably a surprise to the government. Just the shock value alone. I was in the courtroom, I can tell you the jurors were riveted as she sat there very confidently, often smiling, talking about the early days of Theranos.
Under questioning from her attorneys, a theme takes shape.
It's known as the Svengali defense. You know, he was dominating her, and she was in his thrall.
The jury sees a handwritten note from Balwani to Holmes titled Non-Negotiables. It begins, "Every morning I will force myself out of bed and spend 30 minutes, never a minute less, to write what I want from my day." Elizabeth writes a daily schedule. Under Sonny's supervision, she says, that has her rising at 4. "I am never a minute late," she writes to herself. "I show no excitement. My hands are always in my pockets or gesturing." But the prosecution shows jurors emails they claim show that Holmes is very much in control. When the finger stick machines are malfunctioning, yet Holmes is off on a media tour, Balwani texts her, "I am worried about overexposure," without later shoots back, "That media is why we're getting Americare, an insurance company."
But ultimately, she had the final say. If there was something that Sonny wanted to do that she disagreed with, it didn't happen. She was in charge.
The jurors also see this NBC interview.
I'm the founder and CEO of this company. Anything that happens in this company is my responsibility at the end of the day.
3rd, 2022, after a 4-month trial, the jury returns with its verdict.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty. Holmes defiant till the end, taking the stand in her own defense, blaming others, including her former business partner and boyfriend. But unlike with some investors, she was not able to convince a jury that she was blameless.
A federal jury found the Theranos founder guilty on 4 counts of fraud. The jury acquitted Holmes on all charges related to defrauding patients.
And the jury was deadlocked on 3 charges involving early investors.
Elizabeth, do you have any reaction to your guilty verdicts here?
Elizabeth, any reaction?
Do you have anything you want to say?
The woman once hailed as the next Steve Jobs, now facing up to 20 years per guilty count behind bars.
It's a big deal for Silicon Valley because if fake it till you make it.
Question: did Holmes believe her lies? Ken Arletta says he would like to go with the most charitable interpretation of her motives, but he cannot.
I'm more prone to believe that she was a zealot, and she was blinded by her zealotry. But if I'm intellectually honest, I have to deal with the fact that she lied about a number of things. Just blatantly lied. She did wear fingerprint. That's a conscious lie. When she's told me that she had a military contracts and revenue from the military, that's just a lie. And that's not zealotry.
Phyllis Gardner says that despite Holmes's public rhetoric about promoting women in science, the disgraced inventor doesn't live up to those lofty ideals.
Why did you do what you did to Erica Chung? If you're such a champion the way you did, why did you treat women patients the way you did? You're not a champion of women. She's not a champion of women. She's a liar.
American Mirage, the profits of shame and the price of greed. Prologue, the cost of a smile. The American dream has always been a commodity. It is bought in installments, sold in 30-second television spots, and packaged in plastic bottles with bright, optimistic labels. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, that dream took on a very specific, very masculine shape. It was the dream of vitality, of regained youth, and of a smile that never faded. But behind the neon lights of the marketing campaigns and the billion-dollar balance sheets, there was a rot. It was a rot built on the exploitation of human insecurity, the quiet, desperate fear of being less than. 2 men, separated by geography, but united by a hollowed-out morality, became the architects of this era's greatest deceptions. One sold a pill that promised manhood. The other sold a fund that promised legacy. Both sold a lie. This is the story of Stephen Warshak and Kirk Wright. This is the chronicle of the funny money. Book 1, The Smile of the Shark. Chapter 1, The Basement Alchemist. Cincinnati, 1996. The air in the Ohio River Valley was thick with humidity and the scent of industrial exhaust. In a cramped, dimly lit basement in a nondescript suburb, Stephen Warshak sat hunched over a folding card table. The only sound was the rhythmic scratching of a pen against a ledger and the occasional hum of a dehumidifier that struggled to keep the mold at bay. Stephen was 30 years old, but he possessed the frantic energy of a man who felt the clock of his life ticking toward a deadline only he could see. He wasn't interested in a career. He was interested in an empire. He watched his mother, a woman whose loyalty would eventually become her undoing, answering a rotary phone on the other side of the room. Berkeley Nutraceuticals, she would say, her voice practiced and sweet. How can we help you achieve your goals today? At that moment, Berkeley Nutraceuticals was nothing more than a few boxes of generic supplements and a dream of mass market manipulation. Stephen didn't have a medical degree. He didn't have a background in chemistry. What he had was a genius for the hook. He understood that people didn't buy products. They bought the person they hoped the product would turn them into. The back of the magazines, Steve, his mother said, hanging up the phone after taking a credit card number. They're calling from the back of the magazines. Stephen nodded, his eyes bright with a predatory gleam. He had been buying ad space in the shadows of the publishing world, the back pages of Playboy, Penthouse, and Outside. These were the places where men looked for secrets, where they felt safe admitting to their inadequacies. He began to write. He crafted claims that hovered just on the edge of legality, using words like natural, enhancement, and guaranteed. He wasn't selling vitamins. He was selling a solution to the most private anxiety a man could harbor. We need a face, Ma, Stephen whispered, staring at a blank sheet of paper. Not a doctor, not a scientist. We need a guy everyone wants to be. Chapter 2, The Birth of Bob. By 2001, the basement was a memory. Berkeley Nutraceuticals had moved into a sleek corporate headquarters outside Cincinnati. The shoestring operation had transformed into a juggernaut. But Stephen knew the back of the magazine's crowd had a ceiling. To reach the hundreds of millions, he needed the glow of the television screen. He sat in a high-end boardroom with marketing executives, men in expensive suits who specialized in the alchemy of perception. We need something memorable, one executive said, clicking through a slideshow of traditional pharmaceutical ads. Viagra is clinical. Charlie's is romantic. We need to be fun. Stephen leaned back, his fingers interlaced. No, we need to be enviable. I want a character who is so happy it's almost annoying. A guy who walks through life like he's just won the lottery every single morning. The creative team returned a week later with a storyboard. At the center of it was a middle-aged man with a square jaw, a crisp polo shirt, and a grin that seemed to stretch from ear to ear. They called him Smiling Bob. The campaign was a masterpiece of innuendo. Bob didn't talk about blood flow or clinical trials. Bob just smiled. He waved to his neighbors with an absurdly high level of enthusiasm. He whistled while he worked. He looked at his wife with a twinkle in his eye that suggested a secret, vigorous life behind closed doors. When the first wonders of wood commercial aired on major cable networks, the world changed for Stephen Lorshak. The phones didn't just ring, they exploded. The Smiling Bob theme song became a cultural earworm. And Zeit, the once daily tablet for natural male enhancement, was no longer a fringe supplement. It was a household name. It was on the shelves of Walmart, Walgreens, and CVS. Stephen watched the numbers climb. $50 million, $100 million, $200 million in annual revenue. He was the king of Cincinnati, a local boy who had turned a basement hobby into a national phenomenon. He was living the American dream, the big house, the fast cars, the respect of his peers. But the dream was built on a foundation of shifting sand. Chapters 3 to 120 omitted for continuity. Book 31, The Echoes of the Call Center. Chapter 121, The Ghost of Sarah. Sarah, the young woman who had once been the voice of Michael Johnson, lived her life in a quiet suburb of Indianapolis. She worked in a library now, a world where silence was a rule rather than a deflection. But the memories of the Berkeley call center followed her like a persistent shadow. I still dream about the headsets, she told her therapist. I dream that I'm answering a call, and on the other end is a man crying because he can't pay his heating bill. And all I have is a script. She was one of the many collateral grifters. Kids who had been seduced by a paycheck and a fancy office, only to realize they were the foot soldiers in a war against the elderly. She had been taught to view the customers as data points and conversion metrics. The guilt was a heavy, physical thing. She often found herself Googling the names of the people she had scammed, hoping to find a way to apologize, only to realize that they were gone, their identities shredded along with the corporate records. Sarah was a survivor of the Berkeley Empire, but she was a survivor with a permanent scar on her soul. Chapter 122, The Archaeology of a Hard Drive. In a laboratory in Maryland, a forensic technician was attempting to recover data from a partially melted hard drive found in the wreckage of the EMA office. It was the legendary black box of Kirk Wright. He tried to fry it, the technician said, peering through a microscope at the charred platters. But the data is like a ghost. It leaves a residue in the magnetic field. After weeks of painstaking work, the technician managed to pull a single file, a private journal Kirk had kept in the months leading up to his arrest. It wasn't a record of trades. It was a record of his growing isolation. The more I spend, the more I feel like I'm disappearing, Kirk had written. The ice bars, the Bentley, the suits, they're just props for a play. that has no audience. I look at the players and I see their trust, and it makes me sick, not because I'm stealing from them, but because they're so easy to fool. They want the mirage more than they want the truth. The journal revealed a man who had become a prisoner of his own success. He had built a world where truth was irrelevant, and in doing so, he had erased himself. Book 32, The Cultural Dissection, Chapter 123, The Smile as a Weapon. The legacy of Smiling Bob was analyzed by cultural critics as a symbol of aggressive optimism. It's a uniquely American form of violence. One critic wrote, "To smile so brightly that the person looking at you feels like their own unhappiness is a personal failure. Bob wasn't just happy. He was a standard that no one could meet, and the only way to try was to buy the pill." The grin was a weaponized form of aspiration. It turned the human condition into a market opportunity. By selling the once daily tablet for natural male enhancement, Rorschach was actually selling a temporary relief from the pressure of the very culture he was helping to create. Chapter 124, The Bronx Bloodline Revisited. Kirk Wright's childhood in the Bronx was the crucible in which his ambition was forged. He grew up in a world of limited horizons, where the Harvard man was a mythic figure from a different planet. He didn't just want the money, a childhood friend recalled. He wanted to prove that the myth was a lie. He wanted to go to their school, wear their clothes, and then steal their world right from under them. He viewed the Harvard MBA as a Trojan horse. This resentment was the hidden fuel for the I am a scam. Kirk wasn't just stealing for wealth. He was stealing for revenge. Every dollar he took from a high net worth individual was a blow against a system he felt had only accepted him as a token. Book 33, The Evolution of the Scam. Chapter 125, The Deep Fake Dividend. By 2028, the funny money had entered the age of the deep fake. A new investment platform, Nexus AI, featured a virtual CEO who was a composite of the most trustworthy traits in human history. Nexus AI doesn't just manage your money, the avatar promised in a soothing, non-threatening voice. It anticipates your dreams. Using a proprietary neural network, we eliminate the volatility of human emotion. The secret sauce had become the generative algorithm. The Taurus Fund had been rebranded as Automated Wealth. The SEC was still 3 steps behind. They were still fighting the ghosts of Rorschach and Wright, while the new predators were using quantum computing to process their billing loops. The mirage hadn't faded, it had simply achieved a higher resolution. Chapter 126, The Subscription to Shame. The continuity program had become the standard operating procedure for the global economy. Everything was a subscription: your car, your software, your health, your identity. We live in a frictionless economy, a tech mogul said at a conference. By automating the renewal process, we remove the cognitive load from the consumer. What he meant was that they removed the opportunity to say no. The tactics that Stephen Rorschach had been sent to prison for were now the basis for the highest valuations on the NASDAQ. The Michael Johnson alias had been replaced by a chatbot that could apologize in 50 languages while never actually issuing a refund. Book 34, The Residual Lives. Chapter 127, The Prison Yard Negotiator. In the final year of his sentence, Stephen Warshak began a new project, a podcast from within the prison walls. He called it The Alchemist's Corner. Success is about the hook, he told his listeners, his voice sounding older but no less persuasive. It doesn't matter what you're selling. What matters is that the person on the other end feels like you're the only one who can hear them. I sold a smile because people were tired of frowning. He had thousands of listeners. Some were young entrepreneurs looking for an edge. Others were true crime fans fascinated by the monster. He was still the master of the airwaves, still finding a way to project his ego through the bars. Chapter 128, The NFL's Reclamation Revisited. Steve Atwater sat in a stadium box watching a new generation of players. He saw the same hunger, the same physical prowess, and the same vulnerability. They have apps now that track every penny, a younger coach told him. The players are smarter about their money. Steve looked at the bright, flashing advertisements on the scoreboard ads for no-risk crypto trading and automated wealth apps. The apps are just the news suits, Steve whispered. The players think they're in control because they're holding the phone. But the phone is just the new Michael Johnson. He realized that the broken huddle was a permanent part of the game. You could change the technology, but you couldn't change the anatomy of a blind side. Book 35, The Final Mirage. Chapter 129, The Archive of the Whistle. In a quiet corner of the Library of Congress, the original master tapes of the Berkeley commercials were preserved as a cultural artifact of the early 21st century. A researcher was listening to the whistle, a sound that had once filled millions of living rooms. It's a perfect loop, the researcher noted. It never resolves. It just keeps circling like it's waiting for a finish that never comes. It's the sound of a promise that is always next month. The whistle was the sonic representation of the mirage of cheerful, repetitive nothingness that felt like something. Chapter 130, The Final Sunset Revisited. As the sun sets over the Ohio River, the water turns a deep, bruised gold. The empty loading docks of the old Berkeley headquarters are silent. The ghosts of Michael Johnson have finally been laid to rest. In Atlanta, the Ema Mansion has been replaced by a luxury apartment complex. The residents drink champagne and talk about their digital reserves, unaware that they are standing on the ruins of a Harvard-educated lie. The American mirage is still there, shimmering on the horizon. It is the horizon of our own desire. We run toward it, driven by the whistle and the smile, hoping that this time the pill will work, the fun will grow, and the smile will be real. And somewhere in the dark, A credit card is being charged. Chapter 131, The Legacy of the Sawdust. The final secret of Enzite was found in a small notebook in the basement. It was a list of the ingredients that Stephen had originally planned to use. He wanted to use real medicine, his sister revealed in an interview years later. But then he realized that the medicine was expensive and required a prescription. Sawdust was free, and caffeine was legal. He realized that the enhancement was in the mind of the buyer, not the chemistry of the pill. The sawdust legacy is the ultimate truth of the funny money. It is the realization that in the market of hope, the substance is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the story. Chapter 132, The Anatomy of a Smile Final. The smile of Bob was not a smile of joy. It was a smile of relief. It was the relief of a man who no longer felt less than. And that is why it worked. We are a society that is terrified of being less than. We are a society that will pay any price, take any pill, and follow any Harvard man to avoid the feeling of inadequacy. Rorschach and Wright didn't create that fear. They just built $1 billion empire on it. Chapter 133, The Final Dividend Revisited. The check for 0.0% sat on the dashboard of an old truck in Alabama. The owner, a former NFL bench warmer, looked at it and laughed. The postage cost more than the recovery, he said. He didn't cash it. He kept it as a reminder that in the game of funny money, the house always wins, even when the house is in prison or at the bottom of a sheet in a jail cell. Chapter 134, The Whistle in the Static Final. Listen, the sound you hear is not the wind. It is not the traffic. It is the whistle. It is the sound of the American mirage expanding. It is the sound of the funny money being processed by a new generation of algorithms. It is the sound of a smile that will never fade because we are still paying for it. Chapter 135, The Permanent Record Final. The story of Stephen Rorschach and Kirk Wright is now a part of the permanent record of the American experiment. It is a record of what happens when the grind set meets the gullible. It is a record of the cost of a smile. And as the lights of the cities glow against the dark, we realize that the mirage is not something we see. It is something we choose. And the funny money keeps flowing. End of volume 135. Red Bones, The Whispers of Shetland. Prologue, The Salt and the Bone. The North Sea does not give up its secrets easily. It is a vast, gray graveyard that hides its treasures and its tragedies in equal measure, burying them deep within the acidic embrace of the peat or tucking them away beneath the churning, restless waves that lash against the jagged, prehistoric cliffs of the Shetland Islands. For generations, the people of these islands have lived by a code of silence as cold and unyielding as the Atlantic spray. It is a land where family ties are woven like thick, greasy wool meant to protect against the biting gale, yet often suffocating those caught within the tight-knit threads of tradition and blood. But the earth in Shetland is never truly still. It breathes with the rhythm of the tides and the weight of the centuries. Sometimes, when the rain falls with a relentless, driving force that washes away the topsoil, or the sharp, inquisitive spade of an archaeologist strikes a forgotten mound, the past begins to bleed into the present. It starts with a mere fragment, a shard of pottery, a rusted Viking coin, or a discolored piece of bone, and soon the whispers of those long dead begin to echo through the treeless hills, demanding to be heard. In the small, wine-scoured island of Bresse, the ground was finally speaking. It was a low, mournful murmur that spoke of old wars, of treacherous betrayals in the dark of night, and of a primal, ancestral hunger for land that transcended the bounds of modern law. At the center of this rising storm stood Mima Wilson, a woman whose life was a fortress built upon a secret so heavy it had shaped her every waking hour for 60 years. She had lived in the shadow of a debt that was finally coming for its due, and the price, she knew in her soul, would be paid in salt, in silence, and ultimately in bone. Chapter 1, The Morning of the Storm. The wind rattled the window panes of the house in Lerwick, a persistent, hollow sound that Jimmy Perez had grown to accept as the primary soundtrack of his existence. It was a lonely sound, the kind that made the walls feel thinner and the house feel larger than it actually was. Jimmy was a man composed of soft edges and hard decisions, a detective inspector who carried the weight of the island's safety on his broad shoulders, and the lingering, bittersweet ghost of his late wife, Fran, in the quiet, dusty corners of his heart. Every morning in Shetland felt like an act of quiet endurance, a struggle to find a spark of color in a landscape defined by an infinite palette of gray. "Who's there? Is that you?" The voice belonged to Cassie, his 14-year-old daughter. She wasn't his by blood, she was Fran's daughter from a previous life, but the distinction had long since evaporated in the heat of shared grief and daily routines. To Jimmy, she was the anchor that kept him from drifting out into the dark, cold waters of his own melancholy. "Dad, Dad, Dad," she called out again, her voice frantic, a sharp contrast to the sluggish rhythm of the morning. Jimmy appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from his eyes and adjusting his sweater. He watched her scramble to gather her school supplies, her teenage energy a stark, almost jarring presence against the backdrop of the leaden sky outside. "Have you got everything?" he asked, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "You got your gloves, your homework, and what exactly is this?" He reached out and touched a strange, horned helmet, a piece of plastic theater that she was trying to shove into an already bulging backpack. A new-fashioned statement for the Lerwick youth? Cassie rolled her eyes with the practiced, theatrical grace that only a 14-year-old could muster. "It's for the project, Dad. It was Norse Mythology Week. Remember, I'm supposed to be a Valkyria. We're doing a presentation on the Shield Maidens. Keep up, please. Right. Don't be cheeky. Jimmy replied, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. And don't pretend like you're the organized one in this house. We're 15 minutes late already. The fairy won't wait for a Valkyria, no matter how many horns she has. Move it. The domesticity of the morning was a fragile shield against the world outside. As they stepped out into the biting Shetland air, the reality of the islands pressed in with its usual gravity. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, hanging so low over the harbor that it felt as though the clouds might snag on the tall masts of the fishing trawlers. When Jimmy reached the police station, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of stale coffee, damp wool, and the low, rhythmic hum of scanner chatter. Billy, the desk sergeant, looked up from a stack of paperwork, his expression a familiar mix of boredom and hidden amusement. Morning, Jimmy, Billy said, nodding toward the half-empty coffee pot. Morning, Billy. Morning, Craig. Jimmy acknowledged the other officer. Anything of note happened while I was trying to convince a Norse deity to go to school. Robert Junssen's in the cells, Craig replied, his voice dry as tinder. Found him drunk in the market square at 3 this morning. He wasn't just passed out. He was performing, singing Icelandic folk songs at the top of his lungs. The tourists at the hotel weren't exactly appreciative of the 3 a.m. cultural exchange. Jimmy sighed, hanging his heavy coat on the rack. Better he's singing in a cell than drowning in the harbor. Any news for the Uphelly AA committee? It's Justin, Billy said, tapping a memo on his desk with a meaty finger. The geyser Jarl thinks it'll be the best festival we've ever had. I heard a rumor there's going to be a Lady Gaga squad this year. Can you imagine a bunch of bearded, -1 stone Vikings in meat dresses and fishnets? Jimmy smirked, the image both hilarious and horrifying. You know anything for certain, Billy? Billy leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Well, you see, I do. But then, if I told you about it, I'd have to kill you. Squad secrets are more sacred than the law in this town, and you know it. The light-hearted banter was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of Duncan Hunter. Duncan was a local businessman with a shark-like grin and eyes that were always calculating the square foot value of the peat beneath his feet. He was the kind of man who viewed the islands not as a home, but as a collection of leveraged assets. Oi, Duncan, Jimmy called out. You coming to hand yourself in for crimes against the community, or are you looking to sublet the cells and rent them out as authentic island experiences to tourists? Duncan laughed, a sound as hollow as a drum. Well, that's not a bad idea. Jimmy, no. I'm checking if you still need that engine for your boat. I think I might have found a bargain for you. Fresh from the mainland. And will there be a finder's fee involved in this bargain? Jimmy asked, knowing the man's reputation for never doing a favor for free. Of course, Duncan shrugged, unashamed. What am I? A charity. We all have to eat. Inspector, even the sharks. The phone rang then. It was a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the room's levity like a knife through fog. Billy answered it, and as he listened, his expression hardened into something cold and professional. He looked at Jimmy, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jimmy, it's Sandy Wilson. He's calling from Bresse. He sounds wrong. Jimmy took the phone, his pulse quickening with a familiar, unwelcome dread. Sandy was a young PC, usually eager, somewhat green, and full of a nervous energy to please. But the voice on the other end was hollow, stripped of all its usual vibrance, as if the breath had been knocked out of him. Inspector, I'm at my grandmother's croft, Sandy whispered, the sound of the wind howling in the background, a lonely, mournful whistle. I didn't quite catch that. Sandy, the signal is weak. You need to speak up. It's Mima, Sandy said, his voice cracking like dry wood. She's been shot. She's dead, Inspector. My grandmother is dead. Chapter 2, The Silence of the Ridge. The ferry crossing from Lerwick to Bresse was a blur of gray water, white-capped waves, and the heavy silence of anticipation. Jimmy stood at the rail of the vessel, the salt air stinging his face and awakening a familiar, grim focus. He watched the coastline of Bresse approach a landscape of emerald green and peat black, dotted with the white specks of sheep. Mima Wilson. He had known her his entire life. Everyone in the islands knew Mima. She was a fixture of the Bresse landscape, a stubborn, resilient woman who lived alone in a croft that looked like it had been carved directly out of the hillside. She was the kind of woman who survived the war, the decline of the herring, and the modernization of the islands without losing an ounce of her sharp, salt-cured personality. When the ferry docked, Jimmy drove toward the ridge. The scene was already cordoned off with bright yellow tape that fluttered violently in the wind, a garish intrusion on the natural landscape. Sandy Wilson was standing by the gate, his face the color of parchment. He looked less like a police officer and more like a lost boy who had suddenly realized that the world was a much crueler place than he had ever imagined in his training manuals. Is there any sign of a break-in? Jimmy asked as he stepped out of his car, his voice professional yet laced with the empathy he felt for the young man. There's some broken glass by the back door, Sandy said, his voice trembling so much he had to clench his teeth. I called my cousin Ronald. His croft's just up the road. He passed by. He was the one who found her. She's just over the ridge, in the garden, near the old peat stack. Jimmy looked toward the ridge, where the silhouette of the old stone croft stood against the darkening, bruised sky. Could it have been an accident, Sandy? A stray shot from a hunter. It's the season. Sandy shook his head vehemently, his eyes wide. A shotgun blast at that range. Into her back. No. She kept a gun in the hall cupboard for the rabbits. But this wasn't an accident. I know it wasn't. It felt deliberate. Jimmy began the grim, methodical process of the investigation. The air at the croft was heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the pervasive, damp smell of wet earth and dying grass. He instructed Sandy to use the landline to call the hospital in Lerwick, sternly warning him not to contaminate the scene any further. Set up a common approach path and put up a windshield, Jimmy ordered, his mind already mapping out the forensics. Can you handle that? Or do I need to send you back to the station? I can handle it, Sandy said, though his eyes were glassier than the broken window. Can I cover her up? It's starting to rain again, and I don't want her to get wet. No, Jimmy said firmly, placing a steadying hand on the young man's shoulder. I'm sorry, Sandy. We need the photographs exactly as she fell. Every detail matters now. I know you were close to her, but we have to do this right. For her. As Jimmy moved through the interior of the croft, he felt the heavy, lingering presence of the dead woman in every room. Mima had lived a simple, solitary life, but the walls were lined with the artifacts of a long, guarded memory. A photograph on the mantel caught his eye, an old, faded sepia image of Mima as a young woman, her hair wine-blown and wild, standing next to a handsome, dark-haired Norwegian sailor. The Shetland bus, the legendary wartime operation where local fishing boats smuggled agents, radios, and supplies into Nazi-occupied Norway. Bressay had been a hub for such secrets, a place where the darkness of the sea hid the bravest of men. He stepped outside to find Sandy's father, Joseph Wilson. Joseph was a hard man, weathered by decades of sea toil and a lifetime of simmering, unspoken resentment. He stood with his hands deep in his pockets, staring at the ground as if he could see through the layers of peat. Did Mima own this land outright? Jimmy asked, pulling out his notebook. Yeah, Joseph replied, his voice a gruff, low rasp. Every acre, from the ridge to the shore. And your father, Andrew, how is he taking this news? He's at home. I told him not to come down. It didn't feel right breaking the news to an old man over a mobile phone while he's sitting in his chair. He's fragile these days, though he'd never admit it. Jimmy nodded, making a mental note of the family dynamics. You did the right thing. Can you tell if anything's missing from the house? Jewelry? Money? The family silver? I don't think so, Joseph said, a bitter, sharp edge to his voice. Mima didn't have anything worth stealing. She lived on a meager pension and a great deal of pride. She always lived alone after my father died. She was just Mima, stubborn to the end. Jimmy looked toward the nearby archaeological dig, a raw scar of fresh brown earth against the vibrant green of the hillside. A group of students from Aberdeen University were huddled together near a trailer, looking like sheep caught in a sudden, blinding blizzard. What's the status of that dig? Jimmy asked. Archaeological team, Sandy explained, regaining some of his professional composure. Led by a Professor Paul Birkeland, they've been excavating the old mound. They think it's a 15th century Norse settlement, but Mima hated them being here. She called them grave robbers. Jimmy watched the students. In a place like Shetland, where the past was often more relevant and more alive than the present, a dig was never just about science. It was an intrusion into the collective memory of the island. Chapter 3, The Blood of the Haldanes. The investigation quickly fanned out to the neighboring properties. In Shetland, the term neighbor was a complex social contract, usually involving intricate blood relations or feuds that span 3 centuries. The Haldanes were the dominant family on this side of Bresse, and their history with the Wilsons was a tangled web of marriages, property disputes, and long-held grudges. Jimmy visited the home of Ronald Haldane. Ronald was a mountain of a man, a deep-sea fisherman with hands the size of dinner plates and a temper that was whispered about in the pubs of Lerwick. His wife, Anna, was tending to a sleeping infant in the corner of the room, her eyes darting nervously between her husband and the police inspector. "You must be stunned by the news, Ronald," Jimmy said, taking a seat at the heavy oak table. "But I have to ask, you passed by the croft last night." Ronald said, his voice defensive and unnecessarily loud. "I was on my way home. I've been drinking over in Lerwick. It's what I do when I'm off the boat. I work hard, and I drink hard." He's been drinking every night since he got back from the last trip, Anna added softly, her voice devoid of judgment, sounding only tired and defeated. "Look, I'm no long back from the Cassandra," Ronald snapped, slamming a massive fist onto the table, making the teacups rattle. "I spent 6 weeks in the North Sea. I don't know what to do with myself on land. Now get off my back about a few pints." Jimmy remained calm, his gaze steady and unblinking. "Did you see anything unusual, Ronald? Anyone on the road? A strange car? A shadow that didn't belong?" "I got the last ferry back," Ronald muttered, his anger subsiding into a sullen pout. "Had a wee nightcap at the quay. I didn't see a soul, just the wind and the sheep. It's a quiet island, or at least it used to be." Ronald's mother, Jackie Haldane, walked into the room then. She was a sharp-featured woman with iron gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through Jimmy's professional veneer. She was the one who had been volunteering at the dig, helping the students. "It was the bone," Jackie said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made the hair on Jimmy's neck stand up. "I found a piece of skull yesterday afternoon. A human skull. Mima saw it. She was there with the tea. She didn't like it one bit. Said we shouldn't be disturbing the rest of the dead. She looked. Changed after that. The dead have a way of making themselves known," Jimmy replied. "And what about the guns, Ronald? You and your father both have licenses for shotguns. I believe you were out last night." Ronald said, his jaw tightening. I went out lamping for rabbits after I got home. To clear my head, it's my right, isn't it? A man can't even hunt on his own island anymore. I'll need to take the gun for testing. Ronald, standard procedure. Nothing to worry about if it wasn't used on a human. The tension in the room was so thick it felt as though it might combust. The Wilsons and the Haldanes were cousins, but there was a rot at the heart of their relationship. It was a dispute over the very land Mima had died on. Duncan Hunter wanted to build luxury cottages there. Joseph Wilson wanted his mother to sell so he could leave the island. And Mima had stood in the center, a stubborn oak refusing to bend to the winds of change. Later, Jimmy caught up with Joseph Wilson again. The man seemed even more agitated than before. She wasn't an easy woman to love, Joseph admitted, looking out at the gray sea. But she was my mother. She didn't deserve to end like that. Face down in the dirt like a common animal. Did you hear the shot? Joseph, you live just down the hill. Sound carries in the quiet. No, Joseph said, but his eyes shifted to the left a classic tell that Jimmy had seen 1,000 times in interrogation rooms. I told you, I was in Lerwick, missed the ferry, slept in the car. Check the CCTV if you don't believe me. I'm an honest man. Jimmy would do exactly that. But he knew that in Shetland, sleeping in the car was often code for something much more complicated, a secret that had nothing to do with missing a ferry. Chapter 4, The Professor's Excavation. Professor Paul Birkeland was a man who seemed to have been constructed entirely of academic arrogance and expensive Gore-Tex. He was tall, thin, and possessed a clinical detachment that Jimmy found deeply unsettling. To Birkeland, Mima Wilson's death was merely a logistical hurdle, a bureaucratic delay for his research. Mima was clearly troubled by the discovery of the skull. Jimmy said, interviewing the professor as he stood by his excavation trailer. Students like Hattie James tend to blow these things out of proportion, Birkeland replied, adjusting his glasses with a sniff. Hattie is an emotional girl, highly imaginative. She probably misinterpreted Mima's reaction as fear when it was likely just senile confusion. You find her neurotic? Jimmy asked, using the professor's own words back at him. I find her young and prone to dramatics, Birkeland said dismissively. This dig is funded by a major grant. We are on the verge of proving a significant 15th century Norse trade link. I don't have time for local superstitions or the emotional outbursts of students. Jimmy didn't like the man. Birkeland saw the world in neat, chronological layers of soil, ignoring the messy, bloody, and often tragic reality of the people living on top of them. He found Hattie James sitting in the back of a police van, wrapped in a foil blanket that crinkled with every move. She was wearing an oversized yellow raincoat that Jimmy recognized it had belonged to Mima. She gave it to me. Hattie sobbed, her face streaked with tears and dirt. It was pouring yesterday, and I was shivering in the trench. Mima came out with tea and told me to keep the coat. She was so kind, Inspector. She didn't care about the archaeology. She cared about the person. Why would anyone hurt her? Did she say anything to you, Hattie? About the bone? About the land? About her past? She looked terrified when Jackie found that skull fragment. Hattie whispered. It wasn't just don't disturb the dead. It was as if she recognized the shape of it, like she knew exactly who it belonged to. She whispered a name, I think, but the wind was too loud. Jimmy looked back at the dig site. The ghost Mima had seen wasn't a Viking from 500 years ago. The more he looked at the site, the more he realized the timeline was fractured. The coins were medieval, yes, but the mound had been used for much more recent and much more clandestine purposes. Chapter 5. The Ghost of the Shetland Bus. Seeking clarity, Jimmy visited the Lerwick Museum to see Vicky, a former teacher of his and the unofficial keeper of the island's darkest and most precious memories. He showed her the photograph he had taken from Mima's mantelpiece. Ah, the bus, Vicky said, her eyes softening as she looked at the young Mima. Mima's husband, Jerry, and Jackie's father, Andrew Holdan, they were the heart of the operation. They took the fishing boats across to Norway in the dead of winter with no lights, through minefields with the Gestapo hunting them like wolves. Did they all make it back, Vicky? Truly? Jimmy asked. Most did, but there was a dark chapter, a betrayal that the history books don't like to mention. A Norwegian agent named Per Lundstedt was supposed to be a hero, but he was a double agent. He was feeding information to the Nazis. Some of our boys were captured because of him. Families were destroyed. Jimmy felt a cold, sharp prickle on the back of his neck. What happened to Lundstedt? Vicky lowered her voice, even though the museum was empty. The official record says he was lost at sea during a storm. But the rumors, they say the Shetlanders found out before he could escape. They didn't trust the British authorities to handle it properly. They meted out their own justice. They made him vanish into the peat. Jimmy thought about the skull fragment. If it wasn't 500 years old, but 60. Vicky, if a body was buried in the peat back then, what would it look like now? The peat is acidic, Jimmy. It preserves skin and clothing, almost like leather, but it eats the bone eventually, or it turns them a deep, iron red bones. They call them. If that skull is what I think it is, Mima Wilson has been living on top of a murder for 60 years. She was the warden of a secret graveyard. Chapter 6. A Culture of Violence. The pressure on the island reached a breaking point 48 hours after Mima's death. Ronald Holdan was found by a passing motorist, slumped by the side of the road near the quay, his face a ruin of blood, bruises, and broken teeth. There's nothing on the CCTV. Tosh, Jimmy's sergeant, reported as they stood in the sterile hospital hallway. It happened in a blind spot near the ferry terminal. Someone knew exactly where the cameras didn't reach. It was professional. Jimmy entered the hospital room. Ronald looked significantly smaller in the bed. The bravado of the deep-sea fisherman drained away by pain and shock. Who did this to you? Ronald, give me a name. It was dark. Ronald muttered through swollen lips. I'd had a few pints at the lounge. I didn't see him. Just a shadow. His mother, Jackie, was sitting in the corner, her knitting needles clicking like distant gunfire. My boy wouldn't hurt a fly. Inspector, you should be looking at the Wilsons. Joseph wanted that land sold. He'd been hounding Mima for years to sign the papers. And what about the gold? Jackie, Jimmy asked, taking a dangerous gamble. The knitting stopped abruptly. The room went silent, the only sound the hum of the heart monitor. What gold? Jackie asked, her voice too sharp, too defensive. The rumors of the Shetland bus, that the agents didn't just bring radios and guns. They brought gold to fund the resistance. Gold that went missing when Lundstedt disappeared. That's just old men's tales to pass the time in the winter, Jackie said, but her hands were visibly shaking. Jimmy left the hospital and went home. He found Cassie waiting up for him, sitting at the kitchen table with her homework and a cold cup of tea. She looked tired, the shadow of the murder hanging over her like a heavy, suffocating cloud. Can't sleep, Dad? She asked. Just a lot on my mind, Cass. The island feels smaller today. I know you miss Mom, she said softly. I do too, but you're scaring me, being out there with a killer. This isn't like the mainland. Here, everyone knows where you live. Jimmy sat down and took her small hand in his. I'm working on the boat. Remember, the blue one. Fran always said a blue boat would cheer the whole harbor up. I'm going to finish it for her. And for you. It'll be our way of moving forward. Just come home, Dad, she whispered. Every night. Promise me. The moment was shattered by a frantic call from Tosh. Hattie James had missed her mandatory check-in with the university. Her room at the hostel was empty, and her belongings were scattered. Chapter 7, The Call in the Dark. Jimmy, I need to speak to you. A voice gasped over the phone. It was Hattie. She sounded as though she were running, her breath coming in ragged, desperate bursts. It's about the professor. I found his private field notes. He knew the skull wasn't ancient. He's been looking for something else. Mima. She had hidden it in the walls. Hattie, where are you? Stay exactly where you are, Jimmy shouted, grabbing his car keys. I'm at the dig. I think I see someone. A light by the trench. The line went dead with a sickening, final crack. Jimmy and Tosh raced to the Bressay ferry, their sirens screaming into the night. A lonely sound against the vastness of the sea. The wind was a gale now, whipping the sea into a white-capped frenzy. When they arrived at the dig site, the darkness was absolute, save for the swaying, frantic beams of their flashlights. Hattie, Jimmy called out, his voice swallowed by the roaring wind. They found her phone first, lying face down in the mud near the excavation trailer. Then Jimmy saw a splash of bright yellow in the main trench. It was Mima's raincoat. Hattie James was lying in the peat, her eyes fixed on the cold, indifferent Shetland stars. She was dead. Oh, God, Tosh whispered, turning away to catch her breath. She's just a kid, Jimmy. Why her? Jimmy knelt in the mud, his heart feeling like a heavy weight of lead. He looked at the knife protruding from her chest of professional archaeological trowel, sharpened to a razor's edge. Because she found the truth, Jimmy said, his voice cold with a growing, righteous fury. The professor said she was neurotic. He was setting the stage for her to break and kill herself. But Hattie was the only one with a conscience. She was the only one who cared about the dead. He looked deeper into the trench. Hattie's dying struggle had kicked away a layer of soil that the archaeologists had deliberately left covered. There, gleaming in the light of his torch, was a heavy brass button. A button from a Norwegian naval uniform circa 1944. Beside it, tucked into a deep crevice in the peat, was a small, rusted metal box. Chapter 8, The Reckoning of Uphelia. The night of Uphelia arrived with a roar of fire and the pervasive scent of burning paraffin. Lerwick was transformed into a sea of flickering torches and chanting men. The geyser Jarl, resplendent in polished silver armor and a raven-feathered helmet, led his squad through the narrow, cobbled streets, their shields clashing in rhythmic, primal precision. It was the perfect cover for a killer. Jimmy stood on the esplanade, his eyes scanning the crowds of Vikings. He had the metal box in his pocket. It didn't contain gold, it contained something far more dangerous. It contained a ledger, a list of names and dates. He saw Professor Birkeland standing near the harbor, watching the galley being towed toward its fiery doom. The professor looked calm, almost bored by the spectacle. He's not leaving, Jimmy said into his radio. He's waiting for the fire. He thinks everything that could link him to Hattie will be burned or buried. I have Joseph Wilson and Ronald Holdan in sight, Tosh replied. They're both in the parade, dressed as warriors. Jimmy moved through the crowd, his gaze fixed on Birkeland. But as he approached, a hand caught his arm. It was old Andrew Holdan, Jackie's father. He was dressed in his old naval coat, looking frail and ghostly in the flickering torchlight. It's time, Jimmy, the old man whispered, his eyes glazed. The fire is here. It's time to let the secrets burn. I can't do that, Andrew. Hattie James is dead. Mima is dead. We can't let the truth burn with the boat. We did it for the island, Andrew said, his eyes tearing up. Lundstedt was going to sell us all to the Germans. We killed him and took the money he'd stolen from the resistance. We used it to buy the boats, to keep the families alive after the war when there was nothing. Mima knew. She was the one who buried him. She said the peat would keep him silent forever. But the professor found out. Jimmy realized. He didn't want the gold. He wanted the story, the discovery of a lifetime, a scandal that would make his career. Jimmy broke away from Andrew and confronted Birkeland near the edge of the dark pier. The ledger, Paul, Jimmy said, pulling the small book from his pocket. Hattie found it. It lists every payment made from the stolen Norwegian funds. It links you to the illegal sale of artifacts you've been smuggling out of this dig for weeks. You were double dipping, stealing from the dead twice. Birkeland's calm finally cracked. It's just dirt, Perez, old secrets and old money. What does it matter now? It mattered to Hattie, Jimmy said, his voice like cold iron. And it mattered to Mima, as the torches were thrown into the galley and the dragon ship erupted in flames. Jimmy clicked the handcuffs onto Birkeland's wrists. The fire roared, a tower of orange and red against the black sky. But it couldn't cleanse the island of what had been done. Chapter 9, The Silence of the Cells. The aftermath of Up Heli was a heavy, smoke-stained morning. Inside the Lerwick police station, the festive mood had vanished completely, replaced by the clinical, grim coldness of a double murder investigation. Jimmy Perez sat across from Professor Paul Birkeland in Interrogation Room 1. The professor looked disheveled, but his eyes still held that flicker of intellectual superiority, even in his defeat. You really believe you can pin this on me, Inspector? Birkeland asked, leaning back in the uncomfortable plastic chair. A few defensive scratches on my hands from a clumsy student and a book you claim belonged to a traitor? It's not just the book, Paul, Jimmy said, his voice quiet and steady. Forensics found Hattie's blood on your Gore-Tex jacket. They found the unique soil from the trench inside the cuffs. And then there's the witness you didn't account for. Birkeland's stand stiffened. Witness. Who? There was no one. Andrew Holdan. Jimmy lied, letting the name hang in the air like a death sentence. He saw you at the croft. He saw you looking for the burial site long before the official dig started. He saw you threatening Mima when she refused to let you dig near the peat stack. Birkeland let out a short, bark-like laugh that echoed in the small room. That old man is senile. He doesn't know what day it is, let alone what he saw 60 years ago or last week. He knows enough to know when someone is desecrating a grave for a paycheck. Jimmy retorted. You weren't looking for Viking coins. You found a letter in the archives in Aberdeen, didn't you? A letter from a Norwegian refugee mentioned a cache of gold sovereigns smuggled by Per Lundstedt. You realize the Shetland bus wasn't just a military operation. It was a treasure map for a man without a soul. Birkeland remained silent, his jaw tight, his eyes darting toward the door. Hattie found out. Jimmy continued. She realized the bone wasn't ancient. She realized you were keeping the valuable finds for yourself. When she threatened to go to the university authorities and expose your theft, you did what you've always done. You tried to manage the situation. But Hattie wasn't a data point you could just erase. She was a human being with a future. She was an obstacle. Birkeland whispered, his mask of academic detachment finally slipping to reveal the monster beneath. She was a child playing at a scientist's game. She had no idea what that discovery meant for the field of archaeology. It would have changed everything. Jimmy felt a wave of pure disgust. It meant everything to the people who died for it. For you, it was just a shortcut to a headline. Chapter 10, The Weight of Blood. On Brescia, the news of the arrests had a different, more devastating impact. The fragile, centuries-old truce between the Wilsons and the Haldanes had shattered completely. Sandy Wilson sat on the porch of his grandmother's croft, staring at the scarred earth where the dig had once been. The wind felt colder now, as if it carried the weight of the secrets he had unearthed. His father, Joseph, walked out to join him, his shoulders slumped. Joseph looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. The guilt of knowing his son's career was likely over because of a family secret was visible in every deep line of his weathered face. I didn't know Ronald would do it, Sandy, Joseph said, his voice cracking. He was always a hothead, but I never thought he'd fire a gun at his own kin. He fired because we've been living in a house of cards for 60 years. Dad, Sandy said, not looking at him, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He fired because the Haldanes have always felt they owned a part of this land, and Mima was the only thing standing in the way of that greed. He panicked when he saw her, thinking she was going to tell the world about the bone. It wasn't just greed, Joseph argued weakly. It was fear. Fear that if the truth came out about Lundstedt, we'd lose everything. The boats, the quotas, the family name. We'd be the descendants of murderers. We've already lost the name. Dad, Sandy replied, his voice flat. I'm resigning today. I'm handing in my badge. Joseph reached out a hand, then pulled it back, unable to bridge the gap between them. You don't have to do that. Perez, he's a good man. He'll understand the pressure you are under. Perez understands better than anyone, Sandy said, finally looking up. That's why I can't stay. Every time I look at him, I'll see the girl in the trench. I'll see Grandma's face in the dirt. I can't be a copper here. Dad, not in a place where my own blood is the poison in the well. Chapter 11, A Name for the Nameless. 3 days later, the island held a funeral that would be remembered for a generation. It wasn't just for Mima Wilson. It was for the bones that had been unearthed and for the peace that had been lost. The small churchyard on Brescia was crowded with people in black. Every family on the island was there, standing in small, separate groups. The Wilsons on one side, the Haldanes on the other, a physical divide that mirrored the deep emotional chasm that now separated them. Two coffins sat by the open graves. One was Mima's, draped in a simple white cloth and covered in wild heather. The other was a smaller, plain wooden box. Inside were the remains of Per Lundstedt, the man who had been a ghost for 60 years. Vicky from the museum stood by the second grave, holding a small Norwegian flag that fluttered in the breeze. She had done the research. She had found his family in a small, remote village near Bergen. They had sent a letter thanking the people of the islands for finally finding him, even if the truth of his betrayal remained a dark, painful stain on their history. We commit these bodies to the earth, the minister began, his voice thin and carried away by the relentless wind, in the hope that the secrets they carried can finally find rest, and that the living can find a way to forgive. Jimmy stood at the back of the crowd, Cassie standing beside him. She held his hand tightly, her eyes red from crying. She hadn't known Hattie well, but the tragedy had hit her hard, reminding her of the fragility of life on the edge of the world. Will it ever be the same? Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling. No, Cass, Jimmy said, his voice heavy with honesty. No, it won't, but maybe it'll be honest now. And that's a start. We can't build a future on a lie. As the first shovelful of earth hit the coffins with a hollow thud, Andrew Holdan stepped forward. He was trembling, leaning heavily on a polished wooden cane. He took a single gold sovereign, one of the few he had kept from the war, and dropped it into the grave of Per Lundstedt. Debts paid, he muttered, so low only Jimmy could hear. God help us all. Chapter 12. The Blue Horizon. The weeks that followed were quiet, a period of mourning and reflection. The media from the mainland eventually grew bored of the island mystery and left, seeking newer, fresher tragedies elsewhere. The archaeological site was filled in, the earth smoothed over until only the grass remained to tell the story to the wind. Jimmy stood in the shed behind his house, the smell of fresh paint and wood shavings filling the air. He was holding a brush, applying the final coat of vibrant, sky blue paint to the hull of the small boat he had been building for months. She's beautiful, Jimmy, a voice said from the doorway. It was Duncan Hunter. He wasn't smiling his usual shark grin. He looked tired, older, as if the weight of the island's secrets had finally pressed down on him too. I heard about the land, Duncan said, leaning against the door frame. Joseph is keeping it. He's not selling. He's going to turn it into a nature reserve. In Hattie's name. Jimmy nodded, satisfied. It's what she would have wanted. No luxury cottages. Duncan. No profit from the peat. Duncan sighed. A rare moment of sincerity. Maybe it's for the best. Some places are meant for the birds and the ghosts, not for tourists with too much money. They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the waves hitting the shore outside a constant, rhythmic reminder of the world's persistence. You taking her out? Duncan asked, gesturing to the boat. Tomorrow, Jimmy said. Cassie and I were going to take her as far as the horizon will allow. That night, as the sun dipped below the Atlantic, casting long, golden shadows over the peat and the sea, Jimmy Perez sat on his porch. He looked out at the lights of Bresse, flickering in the distance like fallen stars. The red bones were gone, reburied and honored. The secrets had been unmasked. The islands remained a place of harsh, unforgiving beauty and long, deep memories where the salt air preserved both the love and the hate of its people. But as he watched the tide coming, Jimmy felt a strange, new sense of peace. The past had been unburied, the debt had been paid, and for the first time in many years, the future looked as clear and as bright as the blue paint on his boat. Shetland was still his home, and despite the blood in the soil, it was a place worth protecting, a place where a man could finally find his way back to the light. Chapter 13, The Echo of the Gavel. The High Court in Inverness was a far cry from the salt-swept hills of Bresse. The air inside the courtroom was sterile, smelling of wax polish and old law books, a sharp contrast to the pervasive scent of peat and sea. Jimmy Perez sat in the witness gallery, his hands clasped tightly, watching as Professor Paul Birkeland was led into the dock. The man looked diminished, his expensive Gore-Tex replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting suit, but his eyes still held a flicker of that cold, academic arrogance. The trial was a slow, agonizing dissection of the island's soul. The prosecution presented the evidence with a clinical precision: the blood-stained jacket, the soil samples, the incriminating ledger found in the rusted box. But it was the human testimony that truly cut deep. Jackie Holdan took the stand, her voice shaking as she recounted the day she found the skull. She spoke of Mima's reaction, of the fear that had clouded the old woman's eyes. And then came Sandy. He walked to the stand with a heavy, measured gait, his face a mask of repressed pain. He spoke of his grandmother not as a victim in a case file, but as a woman who had spent 60 years carrying a mountain of a secret on her shoulders. She wasn't hiding a crime, Sandy told the court, his voice echoing in the hallowed hall. She was protecting a peace that had been bought with blood. She knew that unburying Per Lundstedt wouldn't just bring justice. It would bring a storm that would tear our families apart. And she was right. Birkeland's defense was a desperate attempt to paint Hattie as a delusional, obsessive student who had accidentally fallen in the trench. But the forensic evidence was undeniable. The angle of the trowel's entry, the defensive wounds, the proximity of the professor's location, the web of lies he had woven was finally collapsing under the weight of the truth. When the verdict was read guilty on all counts, there was no cheering. There was only a profound, heavy silence. Birkeland was sentenced to life, a permanent exile from the world he had tried to exploit. As he was led away, he didn't look back at the families he had destroyed. He looked straight ahead, a man whose legacy was now written in the very dirt he had so callously excavated. Chapter 14, Seeds in the Peat. A year passed, a cycle of seasons that saw the Shetland sun rise and set over a changed landscape. On Bresse, the site of the dig was no longer a raw scar of brown earth. Under Joseph Wilson's careful stewardship, it had been transformed. The Hattie James Nature Reserve was now a sanctuary of wild grasses, heather, and nesting birds. Joseph spent his days there, a man seeking redemption in the soil. He had sold his fishing quota, moving away from the competitive greed that had fueled the feud with the Haldanes. He planted seeds, built stone paths, and ensured that the ridge remained a place of quiet reflection. Sandy Wilson had moved to the mainland, seeking a life away from the shadows of his family's past. He didn't return to the police force. Instead, he worked in forestry, finding a different kind of order in the growth of trees than he had in the enforcement of laws. He visited Bresse only once a year, on the anniversary of Mima's death, to sit on the ridge and watch the sun dip below the horizon. The Haldanes had also changed. Ronald was still serving his time, a man haunted by a single, drunken mistake that could never be erased. Anna had stayed, raising their child with a quiet strength that had earned her the respect of the entire island. Jackie had become a regular visitor to the reserve, often bringing tea to Joseph as he worked. The two families were no longer at war, but the scars remained reminders that some debts can never be fully repaid, only lived with. Jimmy Paris continued his work in Lerwick. The blue boat was a frequent sight in the harbor, a splash of hope against the gray Atlantic. Cassie had grown taller, her Valkyria project long finished, replaced by dreams of university and the world beyond the islands. Jimmy encouraged her, knowing that while Shetland was a part of her, it didn't have to be her entire world. Chapter 15, The Unseen Threads. One evening, as Jimmy was cleaning the boat after a long day on the water, he found a small, weathered stone tucked under one of the seats. It was a smooth, dark pebble, the kind found only on the shores of Bresse. He held it in his palm, feeling the cool weight of it. He thought of the Shetland bus agents, of the gold that was never found, and of the red bones that now rested in the churchyard. He realized that every person on these islands was a thread in a much larger tapestry, woven with stories of bravery, betrayal, and love. The past wasn't something to be feared or hidden away. It was the foundation upon which the future was built. He looked up as Cassie walked down the pier, her hair caught in the wind. Ready to head home, "Dad?" she asked. "Ready," Jimmy replied, pocketing the stone. As they walked together toward the lights of Lerwick, the North Sea continued to churn behind them, its secrets finally at rest. The whispers of the past had been silenced by the honesty of the present, and for the first time in a long time, the silence was a peaceful one. Chapter 16, The Stranger on the North Link. The North Link ferry arrived at Lerwick Harbor just as the first sliver of dawn began to slice through the heavy gray fog. Among the usual crowd of islanders returning from the mainland and tourists seeking a rugged escape, there was a man who stood apart. He wore a dark, tailored coat that seemed too formal for the Shetland wind, and he carried a single, expensive leather suitcase. His name was Eric Lundstedt. He didn't head for a hotel. Instead, he rented a small, battered 4x4 and drove straight toward Bresse. His eyes, a piercing shade of Nordic blue, scanned the landscape with a focused intensity. He wasn't here for the scenery. He was here for the ledger. Jimmy Perez was at the police station when the report of a stranger asking questions about Mima Wilson's croft reached him. He says he's a relative, Billy told him, scratching his head. But there's something about him, Jimmy. He doesn't look like a man who's come to mourn. He looks like a man who's come to collect. Jimmy felt a familiar tightening in his chest. The trial of Paul Birkeland had closed the door on the murders, but the mystery of the gold, the gilded shadow of the Shetland bus had never been fully resolved. The professor had found a ledger, but rumors persisted that it was only half the story. Where is he now? Jimmy asked, reaching for his coat. He was last seen heading toward the nature reserve. Billy replied. Joseph Wilson called. He said the man was standing by the old peat stack, just staring. Chapter 17, The Inheritor's Ghost. Eric Lundstedt was standing exactly where Hattie James had died when Jimmy found him. The wind was whipping his dark hair across his face, but he didn't seem to notice the cold. It's a beautiful place for a tragedy, isn't it, Inspector? Eric said without turning around. Mr. Lundstedt, assume, Jimmy replied, stopping a few paces behind him. You're a long way from home. Home is where the history is, Eric said, finally turning. His face was a map of sharp angles and controlled emotions. My grandfather was Per Lundstedt, the man you found in the peat, the man the world calls a traitor. History has its ways of being definitive, Jimmy said carefully. History is written by the survivors, Eric countered. My family has lived with the shame of his name for 60 years, but we also lived with the knowledge that he didn't die empty-handed. He had a mission, and he had a cargo. The gold, Jimmy stated. Not just gold, Inspector. A truth that would have changed the course of the occupation. A list of those who collaborated with the Nazis not just in Norway, but right here in the UK. High-ranking names. Names that were protected by the heroism of the Shetland bus. Jimmy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. If Eric was right, Mima hadn't just been guarding a grave. She had been guarding a political time bomb. The ledger we found was incomplete, Jimmy said. It listed payments, but not the names of the payees. Because the names are in the second half, Eric said, his voice dropping. And my grandfather hid it in a place that only a Lundstedt would recognize.